Going live. All right, my brother. It's been a while.
Yes, my brother.
It's been a struggle.
That's all right. You know what? My famous black public intellectual Cornel West said, "We got to find joy in the struggle."
That's right. That's right. You look a little dark though. Is there a way you? Yeah.
I don't know why that is. I don't want to mess with my camera.
Yeah, your background looks real clear, but
I don't know why. Yeah, I do. It's a little darker than it usually is, and I don't know why.
Okay, well, we'll go with it.
Okay.
So let me start off with this. I want to go ahead and read your bio to the folks before we get started. So again, thank you for joining us today, Dr. Harris. And I want to read your bio, and then we're going to jump right into the conversation.
Good, brother. No problem.
Welcome to Can We Have a Conversation? Today, our guest is Dr. Kirk Harris. Dr. Kirk Harris, a faculty member in Urban Planning, School of Architecture and Urban Planning. He focuses on racial and economic equity, combating systemic injustice in marginalized communities. He's a practitioner advocating social justice, serving on APA's social justice task, and championing equitable planning practices. With a diverse career, he leads Parent and Community Technology and Law Center, PACT, P-A-C-T, for Black and Indigenous communities. He's co-founded Flawless Families and Healthy Communities, FFHC in Chi-Town, Chicago.
Yes, sir.
African American Fathers Roles. He's directed the Center on Fatherless Families and Public Policy, part of the Fragile Family Initiative. Dr. Harris drives child support reform in Illinois, chairs the CSAC's Clean State Subcommittee, and advocates for policy changes. He facilitates the National Fatherhood Leaders Group, advising during the Obama administration and testifying before Congress. His commitments to youth development earned recognition, notable for the SUPARS, which is pioneering work. Dr. Harris is a legal advocate and a member of the multiple bar associations, including the U.S. Supreme Court Bar. Brother, man, you got a lot to talk about, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on this show, because when we first met, I told myself, I said, I gotta interview this brother. You didn't know that I had a podcast, but I just wanted to go on and talk about some of your achievements, talk about some of the things that you've done in the past, and like I said, this is not a rehearsal. This is right hot off the press. I just want to talk to you about how did you get into the work that you do, and how did you get to the place where you are today?
Well, thank you, my brother Stuart. Look, it's a pleasure to be on with you this evening. The truth is that I guess in some ways, like everybody's story, it's a journey. I actually started my career as a legal service lawyer, and my career as a legal service lawyer began in California, actually in San Diego, where I went to law school. And it's really interesting that one of the unique challenges that I experienced having been a legal practitioner is that many of the very same systems that are impacting our communities and having the kinds of effects that ultimately undermine the strength of not only individuals, but families, is really what kind of got me into the work of fatherhood. It actually kind of drove me to recognize that short of addressing kind of these larger systemic issues, because I would have people come in and they would have issues ranging from housing issues to employment issues to civil rights issues. And the truth is that all these issues in many ways was a function of the inequality.
So this is good. I wanted to ask you, you've been a part of the National American Planning Association Social Justice Task Force.
Right.
Could you share some insights into your role and the goals of this task force?
So, yes, absolutely. So the American Planning Association is the body that essentially is the body that represents us as alleged to represent us as practitioners, as planning practitioners across the nation. And it's a very diverse body, and it works with individuals who are working in cities that are rural, cities that are suburban, cities that are urban. So it has a very large and diverse constituency. But one of the things that that I think it's challenged with is that some of the pressing urban issues, particularly as we emerged out of the whole incident with George Floyd and, Black Lives Matter that had been at least a decade old. All of this kind of ferment around the lack of what was perceived to be the lack of progress in the context of the rights and interests of Black people in America seem to continue to percolate up in many domains. What's really interesting is, in fact, I was saying to somebody when we were in the midst of COVID and the George Floyd thing happened, and all of us were kind of on lockdown, watching our TVs and seeing this madness kind of unfold right in front of our eyes. It was the first time that I can remember in my own experience that I could hear news folks talk about institutional and structural racism. It was the first time that I actually heard that, like, as a regular kind of acknowledgement, and I think organizations like the APA that has had a long history of maybe not paying as much attention to those issues as they should, even though they do represent a constituency that are actually practitioners in urban settings. I think there was a push to begin to get the national organization to begin to think more decisively about the ways in which they can support practitioners in addressing racial, economic, gender, all those issues that kind of create disparities in the context of cities and in the context of place that undermine the abilities of individuals to realize their fullest potential. And we as planners should be doing placemaking that allows individuals to maximize and self-actualize and maximize that which they have, their skills, talents, and abilities. And we should be strengthening communities, we should be strengthening families. And so not recognizing these other things that kind of impact, either be race or gender or economic inequality, will allow us not to do our job as effectively as we should. And so I think the APA began to realize that they need to spend a little bit more time on that. And so they constructed a task force that allowed us to engage in a conversation about what tools, what supports, what kinds of strategies should we be deploying in order to support and to advocate for practitioners out there throughout the country to more focus on these questions of equity in their practice. And so I was just a member of the task force. One of the innovative things they did, which I really appreciated, was that they allowed us to do videotapes. They did videotaping of stories that we told about how we got into planning, why we think equity is such an important issue. And in fact, I don't know if you ever ran across my videotape, but if you Google equity doesn't happen by accident. You'll find a videotape, a really well done tape on talking to the national planning audience about why equity is so important and how equity affects me and affects my concerns about planning practice.
Where is that video located?
You can find it on YouTube. You can just Google it. You say equity doesn't happen by accident, Dr. Harris, Dr. Kirk Harris, it'll pop right up.
Okay, I'll be sure to check that out. That sounds very interesting.
Yeah.
So as the initial spokesperson for the APA's campaign in promoting social justice and planning, can you discuss the campaign message and the impact you hope it will have?
Well, I think my take was one of a number of them. Mine was the first one, and my message, and there were different messages that everybody delivered, but the basic message was it's critically important that we as planners consider equity at the center of our practice and better understand what that means and how to deliver on that. And so I think that was the basic campaign message. Now, when I look back at kind of how much traction that has gotten, there was a lot of activity after the task force finished its work, and those videos were out there for viewing. And I know my video, for example, got a few thousand hits. But I think again, I think we're still, and this is something that is, whether we're in planning or we're in law or we're in education or any field that we're in, we got to recognize that equity, the questions about how systems are functioning and create disparate outcomes for individuals as a function of those systems, is at the heart, should be at the heart of what we all do if we proclaim to be advancing a democratic society. So while I'm doing equity and planning, right, teachers should be thinking about that in their classroom. Lawyers should be thinking about that in the courtroom. People who are engaged in finance should be thinking about that when they're sitting in their boardrooms, right? Because so many of those systems are the very systems that are creating disparate outcomes.
You're right. I agree.
So often we talk about equity, and this is one of my big pet peeves. We talk at equity as if it should show up just in one place or for one set of practitioners, or it's just for those liberals who kind of ain't pulling themselves up by their bootstraps kind of thing, So, but equity is fundamental to the way we should operationalize our democracy, because for 310 years, we had a situation in which America was advancing practices that were totally inconsistent with their democratic claims of being the most democratic society in the world.
That's right. No, you're right. You're right. And I'm listening to you, and I I'm a father advocate, but I'm a family advocate as well. But I you see the disparity in terms of fathers and how they're being treated in the courtroom, and especially predominantly Black fathers, how they're being treated in the world.
Right.
And how, like you said, hundreds of years, decades that, we weren't even considered human. And then, we went through that whole process, and now the process is over, and they're thinking that this doesn't impact us, but there's just the same standard. It's just like wearing different clothes. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And the legacy or the ramifications of that history are deeply embedded in the systems that we all now are experiencing today. So the reality is and I'm actually in the process of starting a center at my university, because one of the real realities of that legacy is the fact that we live in a society that's becoming more highly racially segregated and economically segregated.
Absolutely.
So the legacy of that, which has manifest in our day-to-day lives, and some of us can shield ourselves from it, because we have a little bit more economic flexibility and mobility. But the reality is, even us who have that often are living in highly segregated communities. And when you live in highly segregated communities, it's not just that you're living in those communities that are communities of color, is that those communities of color are subject to different distribution of resources than other communities, which
Absolutely.
has impacts on outcomes.
That's right.
So, the truth is, I love living near my people. I mean, I wouldn't prefer to live anywhere else. But what I don't like is the fact, because I'm living near my people, is that they're being subject to less set of opportunities and resources because they've been highly segregated, and segregated socially, segregated economically, segregated politically. And it creates these outcomes that have ramifications for folks like us who got PhDs, ramifications that are important, but it ain't life-threatening like many of our people are life-threatened by these conditions, right? So this is something we all got to work on. We got to remind ourselves that not only is the business, is we not living in a kind of a post-racial society, we're living in a racialized society where space continues, the making of space continues to reinforce that reality.
Absolutely. I mean, here in the Bay Area, in a 30-minute span, just across a bridge, you have a 50% fail rate, and then you have a 98% graduation rate. I mean, you have the men that's in San Quentin is in that area of the 98% ratio, that area, but that's just the prison.
Right.
And the crazy thing about it is when you talk to these guys, and I teach these domestic violence classes in there and the fatherhood classes, and they're just now realizing what they've been missing, because they thought that every community was like their community. And their community was really dysfunctional because they didn't get to choose where they got a chance to live. They didn't get to choose the parents that they had. They didn't get to choose the finances and to be able to live without hustling and getting stuck up or fighting or killed or seeing murders at a young age. All that brings trauma,
Right.
And then it changes the whole lifestyle of a child, because even when you talk about this economic thing, and they've been doing this for years, but now you're really starting to see it come to fruition in terms of there used to be a rich, middle class, and a poor, but now it's moving towards more now of the rich or poor. The middle class is just kind of weaving out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we call that in planning, we call that the shrinking middle class. And it's because many, and it's really, and I think much of the polarization that we're seeing in our society is a function of the grievances that formerly middle class men, white middle class men, have, because it used to be that you could get a decent paying job with a high school degree, or even less than a high school degree, make a decent living, have a car, have a home, and support a family. That's not true anymore. And what problem that has created is that now many of those individuals are looking for an excuse as to why their lives have been so dramatically transformed in a way that have made them economically vulnerable, something that they have not been hadn't experienced in the past. And they're looking all for all kinds of reasons: immigration, Black folks, government. And if you don't think that those people were not the ones that were storming the Capitol, then I got another story for you, okay? And really, many of those grievances that were economic in nature and were stressing many of those individuals who felt left behind as a function of the changing economy, many of those individuals are the ones that are now kind of MAGA, because they're looking for a rationale and a safe haven for, one, resolving those issues around race, which, by the way, have never been really resolved in America. They're always simmering under the surface. And then secondly, not wanting to point the blame to Wall Street and corporate boardroom decisions, all of which have contributed to why many of the economic fortunes of those very individuals have changed. But that's not who they're blaming. So we've got, and so now we've got this madness where we've got these aggrieved middle class, often white men, kind of angry about the changing nature and demographic of America, and blaming that on their economic circumstances and vulnerability and the loss of their footing and privilege in America. And it's causing enormous consternation.
Absolutely. And if they're not careful, man, it's going to be a civil war.
Well, you know, and you don't, and in fact, that kind of, those words, you know, when they were storming the Capitol, that's exactly, those are the words they were using. They were running, they had Confederate flags, bro.
I know.
They were waving Confederate flags.
Yeah. It's a mess, man. But you know what I want to kind of change gears real quick and go to the policy advocacy.
Okay.
Your advocacy work on child support reform in Illinois is net worth it. Could you shed light on the challenges you've aimed to address and the reforms you've championed?
Yeah. So we've early in my work, specific reform work in Illinois, I worked on pass-through efforts. As you know, I don't probably need to explain this to you, but I'll explain to the audience. As you know, when fathers pay child support into the system, much of that child support does not actually get to the mother and the child. It actually goes to the state to reimburse them for the monies that they've contributed because, quote unquote, the father is not meeting their financial responsibility. So in terms of whatever health care or whatever financial supports that the mother and the child are receiving, whatever other kinds of subsistence reports they might be receiving, those supports are counted against the father, and the father is then responsible through that child support payment to reimburse the state for those payments. Now, for many of us who are looking at this, it's kind of a crazy system, because what we think is that really that money should be in addition to what they're getting, because what they're getting is not sufficient to allow them to make ends meet and to do the job that they need to financially to produce better outcomes to their children. So why pass that money to the state? Why not just pass it to the family?
That's right. Right.
And the other piece is that when you pass it to the state, there is no incentive for the father to pay into that mess, because they're not actually feeling like they're benefiting their child or the family.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely.
so as a matter of public policy, it's bad on two fronts. One, subsistence supports that the government is providing is not enough. So that pass-through should be an addition. That money should be, that the father pays should be an addition. And secondly, we should be creating an incentive for the father to pay and continue to pay rather than them know that that money is being absorbed by the state and never getting to their fit. So one of the things that we did was we worked on some legislation, which we passed, which actually got not all of the money that's being paid into the system by the father, but we doubled the amount that was passed through to the family. So that's one thing. And I'm presently working on I'm also working on some efforts to get fathers who are trapped in the child support system as a function of their inability to pay and their economic instability to get some of these disabilities that they incur as a function. For example, losing their driver's license.
Mhm.
That helps no one, right? When you lose
That's the
your driver's
craziest
license,
thing I ever
when you
heard.
lose your driver's license, you can't get to work. You can't be mobile. You can't, if you want to pick up your child you can't do anything, right? And plus, you need ID, right? So many jobs require a driver's license, right?
That's right.
So to do that is madness. So one of the things that I'm working on is looking what I call more upstream on some of this policy work. So one of the upstream issues is, okay, let's figure out how to right size the child support order. Let's not put in an order that's more than a father can pay, because that's a big issue in Illinois. And that's
not just Illinois, brother.
Yeah,
not just Illinois.
Well, Illinois is my more than me experience, and I know it's a national phenomena that those child support orders are often exceed the amount of the ability to pay, because the judges look at these guys and say, we want to punish you, and way we're going to punish you is we're going to give you a big child support obligation, but it doesn't help the father and it doesn't help the child, because if the father can't meet the obligation, they end up being sanctioned and they're in a worse situation, less likely to be able to support or to provide the support. So that's one thing, beginning to look upstream in some of these things, and also beginning to get courts to be more careful about setting setting orders by default, because that's a big issue also here in Illinois, because what's happening is the many of these men who are economically unstable are also in terms of their residential instability, don't have places to live if on a regular basis. And the way you get notices about child support is through your address, through your then recorded address. But a lot of these guys' address changed, they're gone, so they may not be receiving these notices, they may not be responding to these notices, and as a result, getting defaults because that something got sent in the mail, they didn't respond, and now they got a default order in an amount they can't pay, and they're up the creek. Right?
No, absolutely.
So,
it's an antiquated system, man.
It's a very antiquated system, and it's a system that doesn't recognize the circumstances of the people that it's serving, because in Illinois, the largest majority of individuals being touched by the child support system are low-income men of color.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah,
Okay.
I want to work with you, and we'll talk offline about how we can implement some of those, because I'm working on some legislations too. And what you're talking about is straight across the board. There's an expectation that's set that we didn't set, that we could never achieve,
Right.
And then you want to penalize us for not meeting the expectation that you met, that
That's
you
right.
made, and it's just crazy to think about what you're talking about in terms of you set this expectation, And then you decide, not only do you want to take the driver's license, but you also want to take the professional license.
Yeah.
Why would you want to take a person's livelihood is what he takes care of his children? That makes no sense.
Yeah, it's all ludicrous, and it is, and but it's seen, but this is the reason that child support doesn't work, because it's seen as a punishment, it's a penalty, right?
Yes.
When you, rather than thinking about child support as a penalizing people, because you can't if a person, there's in the research that was done in the early 90s, there's Ron Mincy coined this notion: you can't get blood out of a turnip. And the truth is, you can do all that you want to say that people should pay X, Y, and Z in excess of what they can pay, but if you can't get it out of them because they ain't got it, so who's it serving? You're spending all kinds of money on enforcement. You're alienating the father from the child, because now they can't, they don't want to interact because they don't want to be identified. They got driver's license being taken and they can't drive, they can't function, they can't be mobile. So it's not a system that's actually functioning to support the family. It's really a system that's built to punish the father.
Yes, yes, and divide the family.
And the ultimate effect is to divide the family.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the ultimate effect.
Let me ask you, as the chair of the Clean Slate Subcommittee of the Child Support Advisory Committee, could you explain the significance of reforming debt compromise programs and their impact on families? It's pretty much the same thing, but we're
yeah. So one of the things that we have in Illinois is this clean slate, and I'm still pushing this. The committee has been kind of at how can I say, it's kind of been at rest because there's been a lot of changes in Illinois more recently around legislative changes and the like. But one of the things that we're trying to do with Clean Slate is we recognize, and this is the reason the committee was started, we recognize that the basis for getting relief from the debt that the arrearage that you had, the basis for getting it under the Clean Slate program is that you had to maintain and pay your child support for a certain period of time in order to get the relief that you were requesting. But the problem is that if they could pay their child support for the period of time, they wouldn't have the debt.
That's right. That's right.
So again, the system is like built to not actually allow people to get the relief. And what we found after looking at the Clean Slate system is that very few people were actually benefiting from it. In fact, when people did request relief under the Clean Slate system, they were either denied or couldn't qualify. So if you have a system that's supposed to provide relief, but people can't really access it, it's worthless.
That's right.
You're saying you're trying to help people by relieving them of that debt pressure and all of that, but if the system is built in ways that doesn't make it accessible or functional for people based on their lived experience and their lives, then it's useless. And so that's the reason why I really got involved and interested. And interestingly enough, the child support, the 4D director, who I was, who she and I had a really very good relationship. One of the things before she retired and she left, she said, if you could work on this, I would appreciate it, because it's really, when we designed it, we made a whole lot of mistakes. It needs to be redesigned and rethought. And we already knew that. And I said, well, I appreciate that. And I'm going to try to work on that. So I'm still working on that.
Absolutely. So I guess that leads into our next question, because this is talking about community engagement. And your Black Men and Boys Community of Practice initiative has gained attention. How does this initiative engage with the community, and what outcomes have you observed?
Yeah. So the Black Men and Boys work actually is work that took place over a number of years. And the idea behind it was to explore the voices of Black men and boys around their relationships with their communities and what they believe that they could do to transform and impact their communities in positive ways. And of course, as we went about this work, we could not, it would be kind of insanity to not engage women and girls, right? Because
Right.
essentially they're the other part of the formula of healthy communities. And what we in engaging, there's a number of things that would not be surprising to anybody in this audience or you, is that trauma was at the top of the pyramid with respect to the, and particularly with women. We had the session that we had with women was deep. It was just the pain and the challenge and the difficulties that they experienced in witnessing what was happening to men in community. It was just really, 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 it really left a mark on me in terms of my understanding of how women process this stuff. And for men, they recognize that there's things that they can be doing to strengthen outcomes in their communities, but they also recognize, and as well as women, that there are things that they need externally to facilitate better outcomes in their communities. And I think when one of the things that we try to suggest is that often when you advance these community initiatives, and there's often a lot of talk about what communities can do, but the real question is what partnerships can do with the communities that are willing to do for themselves, because in many of communities of color, we've had long histories of self-help, but we've also had long histories of being denied resources,
Absolutely.
create barriers that have not allowed us to function in ways that allow us to, as I said, as I started the front of the show, to realize our fullest potential. Right. So we've got to have both things happening. We got to have people, those systems that are functioning, and those folks who are in control of those systems, bring down those barriers so that we can maximize those self-help efforts and those engagement efforts, because communities, and as a planner, this is one of the things that really trouble me, is that in cities and many of the planning and some of the planning exercises that I've been involved with, when we go to community and say, we'd like your opinion, we'd like your input, they don't believe us, because there's been so many times where people have come and asked their opinion and ain't shit happened, excuse my expression. Nothing has happened. And so these communities become, there's planning fatigue. You asking us to help you plan something that's supposed to benefit us. We don't ever see anything happen. And then you keep coming back, asking us the same damn questions. You getting paid for doing the planning, and we ain't getting nothing.
Hey, brother, let me tell you, man, I did a symposium in a very wealthy city and county, and the title was Change the Game. And part of this conversation that I had with these folks, and the only people were invited was actually decision makers, so this wasn't open to the public.
Okay.
And it's just what you said. We were trying to figure out, why is it that you have people that don't look like you and I serving our population, getting the money and the resources, but do not have the knowledge or understand the culture. And when I finished having the conversation, people came and said, oh, we need man to man. This is a great opportunity. Nothing happened. You hear me? Nothing. It was a waste of time, man. I mean, it could have been an opportunity for them to look at it and say, you know what? They're right. Who better to serve that population than them? and let me help get them the resources to do it, but what they do is they get the bag and then they want to pay me from the bag, but I'm doing all the work.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
So I understand, my brother. I mean, but earlier you talked about something, and I want to go back to that. You emphasized on the democratic and inclusive community engagement. Can you share some examples, successful engagement strategies and their roles in achieving social justice goals?
Well, let me just say, I mean, people are always asking where the success is. And what I would say to you, Stuart, is in my experience, it's a journey with a destination, with a hopeful destination. And so, for example, I'm working on a big project now in Chicago. And the way that we're trying to change the game in this project is, again, it's a $1 million planning process. They want to have a community advisory group, which might consist of 10 to 12 people, who, if you think about the corridor that we're looking at in terms of the planning, which is about 2 miles, that stretches from Cottage Grove to Halsted, 95th Street on the south side of Chicago, those 12 people in no way, shape, or form could represent everybody along that corridor. So first of all, we have to recalibrate what we mean by representation, right? Because what typically planning processes mean by reputation is getting some community members to share their opinions. And we're saying that's a necessary, but it's not sufficient. And what we're arguing for is something much larger, what we call a community table, which is a much more deliberate approach to getting representatives across that 2-mile stretch. And let me just tell you, one of the things that they spend the least money on often in these planning processes is community engagement. Mm-hmm. Big consulting firms get millions, hundreds of thousands of dollars. They don't, and they
telling the truth. Yes, sir.
They throw crumbs for the community engagement, but claim, oh my God, we want community engagement. The community voice is so important. Well, if it's so important, why, that $100, $200, $300,000 that you get, why don't you throw that to the community engagement?
That's right. Yeah, I know you're telling the truth. I know you're telling the truth.
So I think in my experience, it's reminding folks that if we're going to value community engagement, then we have to pay for it, and that we have to support the community members. We have to stipend them. We have to make it possible for them to be there. We have to be continuous in our effort to support them with childcare, whatever is necessary to make it possible for them to sustain a commitment. And we're not talking about a one-off here on this community table. We're talking about actually having this table as an institutionalized form by which that community planning process has to always come to for a clearance around the approaches, and which will hold the process accountable, because planning is one thing, implementation of the plan is another.
Absolutely.
And if the accountabilities are not in place for the implementation process to take place after $1 million has been spent on planning, and the planning firms go home and they got a nice shiny report and don't shit happen, what have we done?
Right. No, it's kind of like in terms of the architecture plans, the plans look good on paper, but when you got to go out there and execute it and implement it on the job, you're going to run into some problems.
Yep. And the thing is that nobody ever said, and this is one of the things that I tell my planning students, nobody ever said that the planning process is comfortable. In fact, if the planning process is not uncomfortable, then you're not doing it right. Mm-hmm. Because planning should be shaking loose the issues that really are in the way of maximizing, as I said, and I'm go back to that, maximizing the opportunity for people to realize and self-realize to the best of their ability. And
Absolutely.
and when you're talking about communities of color, and you're talking about communities that have been historically excluded, there's going to be some serious conversations to be had that for some people are going to be uncomfortable. But that's
Absolutely.
that's the way it needs to be. And secondly, nobody ever said that being democratic is going to be easy. And you can't expect a democratic process to unfold in a short period of time. You have to commit to it and you have to stay on it. And nor is it going to be inexpensive. So all of those things have to be recognized. And what we're trying to do when we do our planning, and particularly when we do this planning, we're helping to set a new model for doing large scale planning like this by suggesting these values that I'm just sharing with you. We haven't always seen those values in all the places, but we've collected a lot of what we've learned, and we want to now try to impose those values into this process.
I love it. I love it. Well, if you joined us, you're on Can We Have a Conversation? We're having a segment with the Dr. Kirk Harris, and we're talking about some real major issues. I'm glad you joined us. The thing that and we're kind of fast forwarding because we're running out of time, and this time goes real fast, but I do want to talk about some of the future directions in terms of looking ahead. What are your aspirations for the intersection of urban planning, social justice, and community empowerment? And are there any projects of initiatives you particularly excited about?
Yeah, well, the one that I'm particularly excited about, interestingly enough, is the one that I just described to you. This multi-million-dollar project. It's a 2-mile length corridor. It's going to embrace at least 10 to 12 communities. And it's one of the biggest. In fact, in Chicago, it's probably one of two of the biggest planning initiatives that have ever happened, it very much ever happened in a Black community of this scale. So I'm really excited about this, and there's a lot at stake. And so I'm hopeful because one, I think the community is ready for some engagement around new possibilities. I mean, for example, that corridor that I just described to you, it's roughly a 2-mile corridor, number of communities on it. They ain't got a decent damn grocery store.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised.
They ain't got a damn decent grocery store.
By design.
So it's madness, right? So we're excited about this because it really does mean that one of the opportunities in planning is that we think futuristically, right? So rather than the kids who are now in elementary school saying, I'm getting the hell out of here because I can't even go to a grocery store, saying, I'm going to stay here and this is my community and I'm going to grow it and I'm going to grow my career here and I'm going to grow my family here and I'm going to strengthen this community. I'm staying here because I see the potential. And that's what we want to happen on the South Side of Chicago.
Amen. Amen. So that's good stuff. How do you envision the field of urban planning involving in terms of addressing racial and economic equity over the next decade?
Well, I think we got work to do, Brother Stewart. As a planning profession, we got work to do. I think I think we're more open to it than we have ever been, but I think there's lots of work to do because the truth is that we live in a system that is premised on, look, our system is rigged. That's the best way I can describe it, right? It's built on on a capitalist structure that does not necessarily honor notions of community. It doesn't honor collective wealth building. It doesn't honor the ability of individuals to to share and appreciate common goals for their community. And we have to recalibrate also on the way that we think about community building and wealth building, because wealth building and community building is not about the individual enterprise. It's about the collective enterprise. But, you know, when we've here in America, it's all about the individual enterprise. And I think that's not the milieu or the cultural milieu that we emerge it from the continent, albeit centuries ago. But the truth is that that's what created such a powerful continent, this notion of this collective will, I mean, you know, and the collective energy of people. And I think when, you know, if we don't revisit that as a part of our strategy, I don't think we're going to be as successful. But we also have to recognize that while we're doing that, we're going to be engaged in struggle with ourselves and the very systems that are working against us, because we're also victims of a lot of the kind of the approaches that haven't always served us well, right? We're victimized by them, and at the same time, we sometimes embrace them, you know? So we got to be careful about that, and we've got to be self-reflective, and we've got to be willing to put in the work toward that collective enterprise, and recognize that the future is bright if we can just kind of ensure that we inspire, right? We inspire those behind us. So when we get old, they can be in front of us, and they're inspiring, right? Others. Mm-hmm. And that, I mean, that's my hope as a planner, and I don't know what else to say.
Well, yeah, that's your story, and you're sticking to it.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing, and I now I see why we was having so much adversity in terms of getting you on the show, because this is a conversation that's definitely overdue. And so closing up, I just want you to give a personal reflection in terms of your career has been, you know, diverse, from legal service work to academia. How has
myself, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? And I also ask myself, you know, when I get up in the morning, what is it that's going to motivate me to continue to do what I do? And so, and I think one of the things that we have to do as practitioners, and whether we're practitioners, scholars, or whatever we do, we have to ask, what are our values? Are we living out those values? And we have to evaluate ourselves periodically in that context, which is why I always ask myself the question, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Mm-hmm. And I think that's just an important thing, because being a reflective practitioner means that we not only are kind of wanting to learn better about our craft, but we also want to learn better about ourselves and be able to incorporate that into our craft, because when we do that, then we become exceptional practitioners, I think.
Absolutely. So in closing, lastly, is there a message you'd like to leave our listeners with, especially those who are inspired by your work and advocacy? These questions should provide a solid foundation for a thoughtful and engagement podcast.
Well, what I'm going to say, and I think I mentioned this at the beginning, is I'm going to say what, again, one of my favorite Black public intellectuals, Cornel West, and I believe that we should all find joy in the struggle. Our ancestors struggled to get us to this point, and we got to struggle to get the folks behind us to a certain point, right? And be able to set the stage for their success. So I always say, find joy in the struggle, find your allies, find your people, and continue to ask yourself whether you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And, you know, engage in a little bit of not only self-reflection, self-care, because you need that to refresh yourself and always be at the front end, be as how can I say, as open as you can to new ideas. And sometimes if you're just head down and just forging forward, you're not as open as you can be. So you need to take a break, need to reflect, and need to be open to new ideas and possibilities and approaches. So I would just say, find joy in the struggle, stay open, and don't ever compromise your values.
Amen. Well, you've heard another conversation on Can We Have a Conversation? Our guest today is the Dr. Kirk Harris from Chi-Town.
Yo, on the south side.
Appreciate you, sir. Appreciate you coming out, and I look forward to seeing you in Tennessee, man.
All right, brother. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. God bless, man.
God bless you, my man. Bye-bye.